Lucas Kane stood quietly at the front of the community center, a towering figure softened by years of both victories and wounds. The room buzzed with life around him, children darting between chairs, neighbors exchanging small talk, and volunteers hurrying to set up for the evening's event. To the outside world, it looked like any other night in the modest neighborhood hub. But to Lucas, it was something far more profound. This place wasn't just a building to him. It was a sanctuary, a reminder of how far he'd come and how much he still had to give. Lucas wasn't a man of unnecessary words, but when he spoke, people listened. To the younger crowd in particular, he was an anchor, the steady voice that reminded them there was a way forward. No matter how impossible it might seem, they didn't know the full extent of his past, how he had spent decades as a covert operative, walking the razor-thin line between life and death in some of the world's most dangerous places. To them, Lucas was just a wise, retired veteran who made them feel safe and seen. He leaned against a scuffed wooden podium, weathered hands resting gently on the edge. His eyes swept the crowd with an unwavering calm that seemed to reach everyone who met his gaze. When Lucas spoke, his voice carried easily over the noise, steady, low, and full of quiet authority. Respect isn't given, Lucas began. It's earned, through service, through integrity. But before he could finish, a sharp voice cut through the air, silencing the room like a blade. "Hey, old man, you sure you belong here?" Heads turned to find the source. Near the entrance stood Officer Travis Hart. The young police officer stood tall, his shoulders squared with an air of arrogance that dripped off him like oil. His uniform was pristine, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and his smirk made it clear he believed he was the most powerful man in the room. The room fell into an uneasy hush. Lucas's eyes narrowed slightly, though his face betrayed no anger. He simply turned to face the officer fully, calm and unmoving as a mountain. The younger man's condescension was sharp and practiced, like a blade he'd sharpened often. "What did you say?" Lucas asked, his voice even. Travis stepped forward, his boots clicking against the floor with purpose. He gestured vaguely at the room, his words loud enough for everyone to hear. "This place is for people who contribute," Travis said, his tone dripping with superiority. "Not for guys like you, washed up, just hanging around, taking up space." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lucas didn't flinch, but a few younger men in the room stiffened, anger flashing in their eyes. Lucas raised a hand subtly, signaling for them to stay put. This wasn't their fight. "I've earned my place here," Lucas replied, his voice firm but measured. The calm weight of his words filled the silence. Travis scoffed, stepping closer. "You think you're special? You think anyone owes you respect just because you're old? I've got news for you. This is my jurisdiction now. You don't get a free pass." The officer's words hung in the air, but Lucas didn't bite. Instead, he looked Travis square in the eye. "Respect isn't forced," Lucas said quietly. "It's earned through actions, not titles." For a moment, Travis faltered. The calm authority in Lucas's voice rattled him, though he quickly masked it with a sneer. "Save the lecture," Travis snapped, brushing off Lucas's words with a wave of his hand. "You're just another nobody who doesn't know when to step aside." Before anyone could react, Travis shoved Lucas, an open-palmed push meant to humiliate more than harm. Lucas staggered back a step, steadying himself against the podium. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lucas straightened slowly, his face unreadable. The crowd bristled, their anger palpable. People who had known Lucas for years, who had seen the quiet strength he brought to this place, were visibly shaken. Lucas stepped forward, not with rage, but with precision. Though decades older, his presence towered over Travis's bravado. When he spoke, his voice was calm and low, but it carried an edge that cut cleanly through the tension. "You don't know who you're dealing with, son." Travis blinked, unease flashing in his eyes for the briefest moment. "Oh, I think I do," he shot back, though his voice lacked the same confidence. In a single, fluid motion, Lucas stepped aside and brushed Travis's reaching hand away with effortless ease, sending the officer off balance. Travis stumbled, his composure cracking as the room erupted with quiet murmurs of support for Lucas. Travis's face turned red with embarrassment as he looked around and realized the room was no longer his to control. Lucas didn't gloat. Instead, he stood still, waiting as the silence stretched between them. Finally, Travis turned on his heel and stormed out of the building, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet room. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the room relaxed. People began gathering around Lucas, their voices tinged with both concern and admiration. "You okay, Mr. Kane?" someone asked. Lucas nodded, a faint smile softening the edges of his stern expression. "I'm fine," he replied simply. "Thank you." The incident spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Videos of Officer Travis Hart's confrontation with Lucas surfaced on social media within hours, and the community rallied around Lucas in solidarity. Neighbors began sharing their own stories, how Travis had used his badge to intimidate, to harass, to throw his weight around unchecked. The quiet anger that had simmered for months now roared to life. At the next town hall meeting, Lucas stood at the podium once more, his deep voice carrying through the packed room. "We're not here to divide," he said. "We're here to remind those in power that their job is to serve, not to dominate. Authority is not a weapon." His words ignited a fire. Complaints were filed. Testimonies were given. Travis Hart's actions were no longer rumors, but undeniable truths that forced city officials to act. Under mounting pressure, an internal investigation was launched, and Travis was suspended pending review. For the first time in years, the community felt a glimmer of hope. Justice was slow, but it was coming. In the weeks that followed, Lucas returned to the community center as he always had. He didn't see himself as a hero, but the neighborhood did. They saw a man who'd faced down more than just one rogue officer. He'd stood up for their dignity, their safety, and their future. One evening, a young man approached Lucas after a discussion group. He looked up at the older man, awe in his eyes. "Mr. Kane," he asked, "weren't you scared, standing up to him like that?" Lucas smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said gently. "It's the decision to act despite it. And remember this, you don't stand alone. You stand with your community. That's where real strength comes from." As Lucas looked around the room, at the faces of the people he had come to love, the neighbors who had found their voices through his quiet defiance, he felt a deep peace. This was his legacy, not the years he spent in the shadows, not the battles he fought overseas, but the lives he touched right here at home. Together, they had built something no one could tear down.